Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show. Welcome back to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast. Relationships are chock full of twists and turns, but when anchored by commitment, it can really make all the difference in braving the test of time, the thick and the thin. So to learn more about what it means to commit and plan for the long term, we're speaking to Nicole Koelewijn, top relationship coaches recognized by Coach Foundation, one of the biggest names in the coaching industry. Hi, Nicole. How are you going? I'm really excited to have you here.
Hi, Marie. I'm great. It's so wonderful to be here.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know, as far as commitment and long-term planning goes, what's the most common goal or problems that clients come to you with?
In terms of like a common theme, or it's not a tangible problem per se, but it's like something that they experience on that day-to-day basis is making assumptions and not kind of checking those with their partner, which we all do because that's how we function as humans. We need to make assumptions, otherwise we would, a conversation would take like 20 times as long if we were checking everything. But I think especially when it comes to our important relationships, our intimate relationships, that's where we can really fall down if we're not taking the time to check in on those assumptions that are maybe landing us in the same dynamic that we don't want to be in often. So that's what I do a lot of work with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if you think about it, because like on a day-to-day basis, we make a lot of like, if you will, fair assumptions based on like, I don't know, life experience, context clues, all that kinds of stuff. But when having an intimate partner and sharing your life with them, your lives are so intertwined, and it makes it harder to like kind of just go through it unscathed if you don't talk about these differences. So that's really great to hear, and it's a great preface to our topic for today. But before we get further into detail, we'd love to get to know you better. This is Have You Met Nicole? And my first question for you is, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, I don't have a lot of that at the moment.
That's fair.
Because I think I was sharing with you before, Marie, I have 3 kids under 5 at the moment, so that's really pretty busy. But yeah, I guess I love spending time with them and just taking them to do all the fun things that you can't get away with once you become an adult and you don't have a kid at that age. So
yeah, for sure.
Going to see, well, actually, I was about to say going to see the Paw Patrol movie, but I'm not sure I'm going to back that one. They're just being silly and hanging out with them. And I used to like exercising and running and doing some yoga, and that will come back hopefully at some stage.
Yeah. So what is your favorite activity to do with your kids then?
Oh, we like building cubby houses, like forts. So it's very wholesome, isn't it?
That's the cutest thing ever.
Yeah, and I actually have so many fond memories of doing this in my childhood. So yeah, that feeling of being all nice and cozy in a little fort that you built and bringing in some of your toys and just kind of hanging out in there, really.
Oh, that is adorable. I used to love doing playing the fake kitchen. Like pretending to cook. Yeah, that's really fun too. Are there any hobbies or activities that you never you found this you have this newfound joy in partaking in once you started doing them because of your kids.
Yeah, it kind of sparks things that you used to like to do, or that you just used to do, and then for some reason you get busy in adulthood and you're being, your time's taken up with the things that you need to do. But little things like doing puzzles, like now I'm like, yeah, I see the joy in this again. And I do have to step back and think it's not about me. Doesn't matter to me if you're in the right spot. But yeah, I quite enjoy getting the puzzles back out and the Duplo and get creative without it again, because you're not as creative when you become an adult, right? Like you have to really work at finding those opportunities, unless you have kids, and then they kind of tap back into those.
Yeah, for sure. Do you go to the movies with your kids often?
Not so much at the moment. I think in the future, hopefully we will, but they're still a little bit young. So my eldest is turned 5, and he can sit through a movie now, but he's probably the only one. And and I did make the mistake the first time I went to a movie. I went on time, and then we had about half an hour of ads. And then by the time the movie started, he'd pretty much used up all his credit to the movie. So
poor little baby. Yeah.
I envisage us having these fun movie outings, but still on the young side.
Yeah, for sure. It completely. I'm so far removed from babies. Like a couple of my friends have babies, but I'm so far removed from that realm that I can't tell what is a suitable age to watch movies. I just think, I don't know, like I just hear 5-year-olds or like under 5. I'm like, okay, well, you can walk, right? Or like you can go to the movies.
And look, they can absolutely watch TV and until the cows come home and enjoy that. Like my 3 and 5-year-old, but the concentration span and being able to sit in a loud area, like it's so loud. We don't realize until you go with the child, and then you're like, oh wow, this is really stimulating. It comes a bit later, but yeah, it's so true. You don't know until you're in it, and then you realize these things.
Yeah, for sure. And like the kids themselves don't make it easy for me to tell, because some kids who are like 8 years old look like they're 4. So it's very confusing personally, as someone who's not into that realm at all, into that realm, like inside of that realm. But I wanted to ask you as well, you did mention yoga. What are some other hobbies that you are hoping to get back into in the future?
Yoga. What else did I used to do? I think when I think of hobbies, I just think of, going down to the beach in the morning with the dog. Is that a hobby, or is that just something I enjoy doing? I don't know where the line is, but
yeah.
My husband has a very time-consuming hobby. He brews beer, which is great because I love beer too. So, it works for all of us, but it is like, because if he's doing that on a weekend, it's, quite a big chunk of the day gone. So maybe I need to take up a really time-consuming hobby. Actually,
No, well, like, I reckon give yourself some space and time once you have it to just relax for a bit, and then start thinking about what hobby to pursue. Because hobbies, like, depending on how like far you want to get into, like they can be really time-consuming. Any hobby, depending on like to what extent,
I do have this dream of starting to like just illustrate and write kids' books, not to publish necessarily, but it just seems like such a lovely. I think I came across someone once who did that, and I thought that is so lovely. One day maybe I'll do that.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. And I see a lot of people doing like really great illustrations on Procreate now, which is this iPad app, which is like $20 and has so many different features. So that sounds like an amazing endeavor. I really hope that you pursue it or something, and I see
put it out
somewhere.
Into the world now. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
That'd be incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like we got to know you a bit better. So now we'll move on to the interview section. And my first question for you is, what is a relationship and how would you describe a relationship?
It's a great question. And how long is a piece of string? Because it can be so varied. But I think a general theme is it's an understanding between you and someone else as to how you relate to each other. So it's different between siblings, it's different between friends, and obviously different between you and your intimate partner. Basically, it's a whole bunch of assumptions or ways of relating to each other, understandings that you have together. So some of these are explicit, like, for example, we are boyfriend and girlfriend. That's an example of, okay, we've established that that's how we relate to each other. But so many other assumptions and understandings are behind relationships that are implicit that we don't really talk about. And that's kind of what is very interesting with relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you there. And in your opinion, does a relationship still hold the same meaning, structure, and importance as decades ago?
I think it's definitely really different to decades ago. I think before, marriage as a institution was very much a part of society, and, people married for different reasons. And it wasn't just for love, and that was kind of your status or your financial security or just what you were expected to do. And I think now there's a lot more choice around, do I want to have a relationship? Who do I want to have that with? What does it look like? Obviously not to discount that some people are still entering into relationships for different reasons. But I think generally people now are pickier. Like there are higher expectations for what we want out of our relationships. It's not just, someone to raise a family with, but or if that's what you choose to do, but it's, you want a best friend, maybe you want someone that you're attracted to and in love with and want to kind of keep that going throughout your relationship. You want an equal co-parent. So I think the landscape has definitely changed in that regard.
Yeah. And what does commitment entail in a relationship?
So as in you're asking what it means,
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to steal a loose definition from the Gottman Institute because I think it's a great one. So believing and acting on the belief that your relationship with this person is your lifelong journey. So that means kind of choosing to hold them in high regard compared to imagined versions of themselves or compared to other people, also compared to other life circumstances that might pop up that could take your attention away from the relationship. So I like to think about it as choosing again and again for that person, despite all the other things that are going on.
Yeah, that's really, really well said, super succinct. And how does it influence our long-term planning with our significant other?
So I think with the way that commitment kind of comes into that long-term planning is, okay, it's a choice, right? So we want to be choosing to be together and acting in ways that are consistent with that for our, long-term future. So it's about kind of setting up those little understandings between you. I mentioned those implicit understandings, which we don't talk about on a day-to-day basis very readily. But I think how it comes into it is being committed to have those conversations on an ongoing basis and to really think about who you want to be in the relationship, what you want to be together, what you want that dynamic to be like, and to keep coming back to that. And to realize it's going to change a bit as you go along the path because you can't plan for everything. But I think it comes back to just that commitment to the fact that this is a process. Being in a relationship is a process, and it takes time and energy, and not in a negative way. I think sometimes people think, commitment, that sounds like a lot of hard work and I'm going to have to compromise. And And yeah, it's hard work sometimes. And yeah, you have to compromise sometimes, but there's so much you can also get out of it. So much
Yeah, it's kind of like hard work, and you get like high reward for it. It's really fulfilling and gratifying at the end of the day after all of that hard work. So, relationships don't have to be for everyone, but they can be really rewarding as well. But I also wanted to ask you, what is the importance of long-term planning? How would it affect a relationship?
Yeah. So I think if you're not kind of having this approach to your relationship where you're actively, thinking about it and planning it, I think it's so easy to slip into autopilot and to just kind of be taken on a reactive journey. Things will pop up that will be upsetting and that will cause you to react in a certain way. And if you're not really, if you haven't had conversations beforehand around, okay, how do we want to deal with this type of conflict if it comes up? And of course, you can do that in the time as well, the time itself when it pops up. But if you've kind of had those conversations ahead of time, it diffuses the conflict a lot more because you've kind of talked about it. You've openly had that discussion and talked about, okay, well, we talked about if we do have conflict in this area, this is how we wanted to approach it. Like we wanted to approach it as a team, and we wanted to, take the time to sit down and diffuse and then have an open, curious conversation about it, for example.
Yeah. And
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
Oh my God. No, continue.
I'll just add, so that's like on the little everyday things. But I think if I talk about the bigger picture, if you're not kind of planning for what you want your life to look like, ahead of time, as I mentioned, that autopilot kind of kicks in and you won't be doing the things that you want to do either. For example, maybe you want to, or you've just assumed at some point I'll travel around Australia. We'll travel around Australia together. We're going to do that. We didn't really talk about it, but it's kind of in your head. And then it kind of time goes on and you think, oh, actually, like we didn't do that and we missed the boat a little bit. And it's not because you didn't want to do it. It's just easy to autopilot. We all do it.
Yeah, and it's kind of like making sure you're on the same page as well, and so that like everyone's expectations in the relationship are kind of met or kind of at least talked about and discussed. Everyone's heard out. So that makes a lot of sense. So
I think
yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
I think that's
yeah.
perfect because I think I heard a quote once, all conflict is basically a mismatch in expectations versus reality. So that's kind of where that gap is where a lot of conflict happens. So the more that you can talk about things ahead of time, the less surprises there are going to be and the less that gap is going to kind of filter through your relationship. Of course, you can't get rid of all the gaps because, we're not filling out a 200-page questionnaire before you enter into a relationship. But, I think if you can do that for the big things at least, for the non-negotiables, then it's very valuable.
Yeah. And because you mentioned before that, a mismatch of expectations could lead to conflict, it sounds like there's more than just questions or points of discussion that need to be brought up in conversations about long-term planning. So essentially it sounds like, there needs to be a space for it. What kind of environment should this be held in? What kind of language should be used?
Yeah, so I think the biggest, in terms of the space, I think just providing yourself with the space where you have no distractions per se. I mean, that's a little bit hard to do, but it's so valuable if you can carve out that time. So maybe it's having someone to take the kids and to go for an hour and have a coffee with the intention of talking about, getting out your agenda items to be very dorky, but kind of having a very intentional conversation about it, because we just don't have these conversations on the couch after you put the kids to bed, or even if you don't have kids, of course, like life is busy, and some they often things that you need to talk about are confronting, and that's uncomfortable, and people will actively or just unintentionally avoid them. So if you can go, even make the space yourself, if you feel like you have a dynamic where you feel like you're both in a good headspace to be able to have those conversations, you're entering into it really curiously, trying to kind of bridge any of those assumptions. So asking lots of questions about, okay, you said you wanted to communicate better, but what does that mean? What does communicate mean? That's such a huge word, right? And it means different things to different people. I think, creating that space yourself, or going to see someone, for example, like me, where you can have that, where you're giving yourself that space and you've got that neutral person there to kind of guide the conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And so what kind of questions should be asked, or like what points of discussion should be brought into this conversation?
Yeah, so I think there's the big kind of practical logistical questions, which are important. It's important to have those conversations around, how do we want our lives to look like in terms of, do you want kids? Which country do you see yourself living in? What career aspirations do you have? What kind of role would you play if we did have kids? Would you stay at home? Do you want to keep working? These things that are kind of the non-negotiables for you as an individual, with what you want from your relationship in your life. I think those things are, it's paramount to have those discussions, because they will very actively influence the course of your life. And then if you don't have these discussions, that's where resentment can creep in. But also, so there's the big practical questions, but then also on those day-to-day interactions, like how do we want to be as a couple? Like how do we want to feel? Do we, are we going to prioritize joy, comfort, like warmth for each other? Just like really, and it might sound a little bit intangible, and in many ways it can be at first, but if you are continuing to have those like the values of what you want out of your relationship that you've discussed openly, and you kind of agreed on these, then you'll keep coming back to these, and that should kind of form the basis of how you relate to each other. And so it's kind of planning for those big questions, but also planning for, okay, how do we actually want to be together? How do we want to carry out our lives, and how do we want to deal with conflict when it arises? Those little things, because that is a relationship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what are some challenges that couples tend to face when trying to talk about long-term planning and trying to decide on these things?
I think a big one is that people feel a bit hesitant to do it because it feels quite stifling, or that you're locking in a certain, decision that you've made. So that can be a little bit scary for people to think, okay, if I said this 2 years ago, I can't go back on it now. I've kind of expressed it in that time, but or maybe it's quite a confronting thing to talk about as well. So I think, yes, that feeling of thinking, okay, what I lock in now is forever. But then also I think another aspect people struggle with is the fact that it can be quite confronting. It can be really uncomfortable having to think about how you want to be in a relationship. Maybe if you're, what you've grown up with and what was role model to you was quite different to how you want to go forward. That's a pretty confronting realization, and that can, be, people might not want to address that because it brings up a lot of things from the past.
For sure. And how do you think they can overcome these challenges?
So I think with the first one around feeling like what you decide at a certain time in a conversation is forever, I think just, prefacing these conversations with the fact that obviously people change, relationship dynamics change, individuals change. It's not the fact that you're not locking it in forever. You're just kind of committing to talking about it. So committing to the fact that you want to keep that open line of communication the whole way through. And when things do change, then you're bringing that up, and that's fine too. And then you're kind of going from there. In terms of feeling some apprehension about difficult topics, maybe from your past or the family you grew up in, I think it can be really helpful to get some help individually as well, like seeing a counsellor or a psychologist if there are things that come up for you around your family of origin that you think, okay, I want a bit of a safe space to explore this in, then I would definitely go get some help with that as well.
And what kind of impact can it have on the relationship if it goes unaddressed?
Well, I think the big one is just that expectation versus reality is you're going to have that gap. You're going to have assumptions there that are perhaps not correct that you've been acting on, and that could lead to resentment or disappointment, basically, because it's going to come out in some way. These things that are very important to us, they come out whether we talk about them openly or whether they come out passive aggressively, or whether one of you starts stonewalling the other person, shuts down. They're going to come back and in some format and be present in your relationship in one way or the other. So better to kind of put it out to the world at the beginning, or not the world, but your world.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So at what stage in a relationship should commitment and long-term planning become more of a necessity, more of a priority?
I think it's obviously different for everyone, but whenever there's a big transition or some kind of decision that is going to set your life on a certain trajectory, so perhaps that's taking a particular job, or moving countries, or becoming parents is a big one that I work with people on. So I think coming back to the parent one, to becoming parents, you kind of go from two individuals that are in a relationship, but you still have a lot of autonomy and freedom, and you're a team. But I think that the level of teamwork you need when you start adding other people into the relationship that aren't you, then becomes it goes to a next level, because it's not just your interests that you're having to work with, it's the interests of little people as well. So before, if you were fine for your partner to go on a boys trip every month before, great, you got some time to yourself, you could do whatever you want. And now it's different. If you have some children in the mix, that's directly impacting you and that family dynamic. So I think that's a big one where if you're hoping or about to enter into parenthood or any of those bigger transitions that might throw a spatter in the mix, that's a great time.
Yeah. And what are some obstacles that couples might face in transitional periods like this?
So similar to what I mentioned before, I think it can be confronting and triggering, especially on the parenting. If you look at parenting and then thinking about how you were parented and how you wanted to, or how you want to kind of go forward, and maybe that's different, or I think it can be very triggering. So I think, again, like just being able to step back and have that self-reflection practice, having a look at what's going on inside of you during that period, or when things start to take a certain course, that is, it's confronting. So I think that's when it can be really good to set some time aside to really consciously have a look at what you want to do going forward and how you're going to do that together.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are some common misconceptions about commitment and long-term planning in romantic relationships?
The biggest one is probably that it's boring. It's not sexy, commitment. It's got a little bit of a bad rep sometimes. I think people think, okay, that's it for my exciting love life. I'm hemmed in now. This is what it's going to be. But I think it's, yes, there is a level of needing to compromise, and, it's not just your needs anymore. But out of that breeds so much opportunity for growth, and you then get to experience, the joys that the other person is experiencing in their life, and you get to go through challenges with them, which, yes, it's also, maybe not that enjoyable in the moment, but you're there with someone else and growing with them. So from that commitment brings a lot of opportunity for growth and for all the things, really.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I have to vouch on the side of commitment just because, like, it wasn't that long ago that I was like having a roster and like not committing at all, not in a committed relationship, and it wasn't fun. Like, it was kind of fun in the sense of like, oh, this is really entertaining and I have lots of stories, but it wasn't fun in the sense of like, it's just really tiring. So like, have to meet someone new all the time, or every few days, every few weeks, every month or so. So I feel like the pros and cons, and yeah, you're right.
Absolutely. Pros and
Yeah,
cons of every
yeah,
decision is
yeah,
isn't there? But
absolutely.
I guess if you do make that commitment with someone, then it's kind of, there's that safety net. They know you. You don't have to, as you're saying, it doesn't take as much energy. You've got all the credit in the bank. You can just say one word. They know what you mean.
Yeah. And if you commit to the right person, if that's the right person for you, it's not going to be boring. Like, okay, fine. Let's be real. It's real life. There's going to be some boring, mundane moments. Okay, but like, if they're the one for you, you're not going to feel tied down. That's my personal opinion. But what do you think, actually?
Yeah, I think if you had love, that, you had that love feeling really strongly at the beginning of your relationship, you had that basis of, fondness and that friendship, and that's there, and you were head over heels for this person at the beginning, I think that is a real sign that this is worth, giving at least a shot to see if this can work. And then coming back to that feeling, because yes, as you say, obviously it's not going to, the highs that we experience in love are driven by all sorts of hormones that we cannot sustain. Like, our body doesn't sustain it, right? It kind of fades off, and then you start getting into more regular, like you start noticing their flaws, and you start just seeing them for the normal person they are. And from that point, it starts to become a little bit more like, okay, do I want to keep going with this? Was that feeling of love, is that worth hanging on to? Okay, if it is, and it's not always, if it is, and then like realizing it's going to be a little bit up and down, and that it is going to be active investment in trying to keep that, keep that love and connection there.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there. I also did see something online called overcommitment. Do you think that that's a possibility in relationships? And is it necessarily a bad thing as well?
Too much of anything is bad, right? I think overcommitment could look different in every relationship, but you do want to maintain your sense of individuality in a relationship. You don't want to kind of merge too much as people, because then I think that's where it can get really boring, and it,
Yeah.
that sense of otherness, and being able to learn new things about your partner, because there's always new things to learn, right? We're always changing. I think that is, important to a relationship. And Esther Perel, a quite famous psychotherapist, she talks about this in her book Mating in Captivity. So that's around like, how do we maintain, how do we have that close, long-term committed, perhaps domestic relationship with someone, but also, her argument, or she was speaking about the fact that to have that kind of romantic fire or the romantic spark, there needs to be a sense of otherness. You do need to kind of have different lives. Otherwise, you're too enmeshed. Yeah. So I think definitely being able to maintain your individuality and be okay with if you are single and maybe you don't want to be, but you're okay with it. So if the relationship breaks down, it's not, oh gosh, I failed as a person because I identified with this relationship so much. It's, okay, that's really hard. I really wanted this relationship to work, but it hasn't, but I'm okay. Like, I'm still okay as me, as a person.
Yeah, completely. So before we end off this section, I wanted to ask you if there are any resources or tools like books, workshops, or exercises that you'd recommend to couples that would maybe help them in their long-term planning journey.
Yeah, I think a really great place to start is having a look at your values, so your individual values, and doing that together. So that can take many forms, and there's lots of different resources around how you can kind of tap into what your values as a person are. And when I say values, I mean the things that drive your decision making, why you make the choices why you made the choices you have until now, what's important to you, how do you want your life to be. They're kind of concepts that not everyone thinks about because they're quite, they don't really pop up in day-to-day life. So I think if you can kind of start there, have a good sense of your individual values and then kind of talking about those and how they could overlap, and then having to think about what you want your values as a couple to be, that can be an awesome place to start to have that framework when things do get hard. Come back to those values and think, okay, this is how we wanted to be. Are we doing that in how we're approaching this problem? Are we doing that with how we're approaching the next hard decision that we're making together, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it sounds like it also would be a great exercise for getting to know what your partner values in, let's say, in situations of conflict, knowing what your partner wants to hear or knowing how your partner wants to be treated can be immensely helpful in resolving these situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a quote, to know is to love. I have no idea where I heard it, but it really resonated with me. So the more you kind of know about someone, the more you feel that, that connection, that compassion. So the more you can kind of understand what's happening for them in a certain moment, maybe that's a moment of conflict. You can say, okay, I can see that they're shutting down and I know that he or she's doing this because of X, Y, and Z. And not to use that in a way that's condescending or, passive aggressive, but it can give you the next level of empathy and, it can help you assume the best from your partner, which I think is an awesome principle to apply as well, to go in with the most generous assumption or the most generous interpretation of what they could have meant.
Yeah. For sure, because a lot of the time, the worst assumption usually isn't reality. So it's probably better to treat it with compassion as well. So what were the other resources that you were going to mention?
I think if you head to the Gottman Institute, they have a lot of really great courses that couples can do, together at home. Another resource that I love is, and there are a few different people that have put out products to this effect, but they're basically cards that talk about the mental load.
Oh yeah. Wait, no, maybe it's something else. I might be mixing it up with something else. Okay, yeah. What's this card game?
So I think it's called. There are a couple. I think there's one called, and I'm blanking on them. There's no, I'm blanking. I know Esther Perel has one.
Oh, yes, I believe I know of that one.
So she has Where Should We Begin? A Game of Stories. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up in my head. And then, so that's great too. But, and that's basically like questions to get you having deeper conversations with your partner. So that's a great resource. Yeah. So it's basically a whole bunch of cards around what, the day-to-day tasks in your relationship. Mm-hmm. And that's also a great one to kind of see what each of you have on your plate and what might be causing. So the premise behind it is to have a look at what's on your plate and then to divide it up more equally or a way that feels right. But I think also it can be great to kind of use those to talk about what are the stresses in there and to then have open conversations about that. So I think that's a really good one for if you find it quite difficult to identify what's stressing, like what external pressures you might be dealing with that are filtering into your relationship.
Yeah.
I think that's a great one too.
Yeah, those sound like amazing resources. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'll definitely be looking up the card game again because I remember like being so into the idea of maybe buying them and using it myself, but then it completely fell off my radar. So I've got to like keep an eye on it.
I think that's the case of all of these kind of things. They're so good to do, but they fall off the radar, don't they?
Yeah, for sure. Like that's why you've got to have so many tabs, even though it's not good. Sometimes you just got to have that reminder there. Like, so when you go and close it, you get reminded, I needed to do this thing. But yeah, definitely going to put that back on my radar. It's beautiful packaging too.
It is. It's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Big fan of the game. Although I don't know if I can say that if I haven't played it yet. But I am a fan in the making.
Yeah, I haven't played it yet either.
Do you have it yourself?
I've ordered it, but I haven't got it yet. But I've done different versions of it. If that makes sense, like different. But I just love that this is kind of
Well, you're
take what you want out of it and leave the rest.
Yeah, the girlies are suckers for the packaging. I just know like all my girlfriends will fall in love with the packaging. So thank you.
Great graphic design work behind that.
Yeah, amazing graphic design work. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now we'll move on to the open mic section, and this is your opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about, and it doesn't have to be related to the topic. So the floor is yours. Take it away.
Okay. I think because it's such a big part of my life at the moment, it comes, the first thought is parenting. And I just often think about how related parenting, I read a lot of parenting books. I read a lot of books about relationships. And, obviously the parent-child relationship is a relationship, but there's so many crossovers and so many principles that ring true to those demographics. I think sometimes we think that it's really different, talking about, and of course there are differences, but, when you're looking at how to relate to your child and how we want to consciously act as a parent, which I think gets a lot more attention than how we want to act as a partner, to be honest. I think it's a lot more accepted that we don't know how to, we're not necessarily born being able to be great parents. We have to kind of read about things and do some work on ourselves and, really actively try and stay cool and calm and collected when getting it like a foot to the head and, a shoe to your thigh. But talking from that experience.
And a Lego brick under your foot.
So painful, those Lego bricks. Have you seen this? I think there's a meme with a shark sticking its head out of the water. It's kind of jumping out of the water, and it's like it's making fun of the fact that he's just stepped on Lego. And I really relate to that.
That's a good one.
But yeah, I think I like. Yeah, I think what I wanted to talk about is I think that it's we do spend a lot of time. Well, not everyone, but I think a lot of people spend time and looking into how to parent a certain way, but it's not necessarily something that we as a society are so comfortable talking about how to partner a certain way, how to be in a romantic relationship a certain way. And there are, lots of skills that you can learn that will help you with that too. And lots of self-reflection exercises that obviously will help with that as well. So, it's one area in life that we don't seem to give the airtime it requires, I think. I think we're kind of, you're kind of just a bit of you're relying on whoever you experienced growing up, but whoever your role models around you were, what you witnessed and what you happened to stumble upon. But I think there's so much within our power that we can do to be the partners that we want to be. And it does take a little bit of work, but it's so worth it.
Yeah, for sure. It's like if you can have the resources and the tools, and if you have the ability to learn how to be the best possible person for the person that you love, why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we spend so much time and energy thinking about like, okay, my career, how do I want to be? How do we want to craft that? And, if you ask most people, they would probably say, oh, no, like my family is more important, or, my relationship is more important than this job. But we're not it's not just accepted to actually talk about that and for it to be a process. I think sometimes people think, oh, no, if it's not perfect, then it takes the romance out of it, or the spark or the magic out of it. But, nothing's perfect.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Nicole. I had such a wonderful time talking to you. You were so informative and you were such a pleasure to chat with. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Yes, so you can head over to my website, which I think you're going to link in the show notes. So, but basically, if you type in Nicole Koelewijn Coach, although you'll definitely need to refer back to how to spell that. But yes, my website's a great first point of view and also point of call. You should also find me on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, amazing. Yeah, sure. We'll link those in the show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Nicole, once again for spending your afternoon with us. And we'll catch you in the next episode.
My pleasure. Thank you, Marie.
You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.